Hey there, this is Françoise. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you step by step how I painted these beautiful trees in the sky using liquid watercolors. You're going to learn the method I used to create gorgeous watercolor landscapes using those concentrated liquid pigments, as well as all the techniques I use in all my paintings to make them pop. You can see this painting is very vibrant, and by the end of the video you will know the tools and techniques to get this kind of look in any of your own watercolors. Today I'll be working on Canson l'Héritage cold pressed 100% cotton paper, and I'm using concentrated watercolors by Art Philosophy. I'm using 2 shades of green, 1 brown one, and 1 black one, and it will be enough to get color and contrast in this painting. If you don't have concentrated watercolors and just came here for the painting itself, you can very well use paints in a pan or a tube. The process is going to be the same. Just make sure to pick at least one vivid green. I like to use a large ceramic plate when I use those paints. I just drop a little bit of liquid with a pipette, and as I paint, I'll use some of each color, and I can also mix colors together. For instance, I can make my darker green even darker with some brown or black added in. Don't be afraid to mix colors when you paint. Limit yourself to, I'd say, 5 maximum if you're a newbie with watercolors. Start mixing them to see what range of shades you can get with them. I'm wetting my paper with a flat brush. I want it very wet so the colors can flow, but not soaked up either, otherwise there will be pools of water here and there, and we will have to soak them back up anyways. I suggest to go back and forth with a brush so you don't miss a spot, and do it for at least a good minute, so your paper has time to absorb some of that water and stay wet longer as we work. As soon as I am done, I start dropping my colors. The idea here is to paint a first layer of the colors we see in the reference photo or our imagination if that's what you do. Don't make the mistake I made in this painting since I had to do it twice. Keep it light for the first layer. Mine was way too dark right from the start. And if it's way too dark right away, then there will be much room for more color. So keep in mind those concentrated watercolors are indeed concentrated. So make sure to add lots of water to them for the first layer. I'm starting with the lighter green I have. I tap my round paintbrush randomly on the paper. Then I add some of that darker green on the spots that seem darker to me on the photo I'm using. And by the way, I'll link this photo in the description if you want to take a look. I'm using a damp and clean brush to lift color here and there because I want to make sure there's a sense of light in this painting. You may have noticed I had left some spots paper white, but I felt there was not enough of them, and for that, the lifting technique is great. If you use it, you have to make sure the paints are still wet. And with concentrated watercolors, it's even harder to get back to the white of the paper, but it's possible to lift them a little bit. So just make sure things are still wet when you do that. And finally, I end with a darker shade of green I got by adding some brown to my dark green. I noticed the corners of my reference photo are the darkest ones, so that's where I add my darker green. My paper was still wet and it's spreading nicely still. And if you noticed your paper has started to dry, if you see the paint isn't spreading much, it's better to let this dry now, re-wet it completely later, and add that darker green shade then, otherwise you will get blotches of paint. I'm lifting a bit more color in places, and I let this dry with a heat gun because it's a lot faster. Now we have a nice base for the rest of the painting. And what we're going to do next is add texture and increase contrast. But the hardest part is done, this wet and wet part that sets the foundations for the rest of the painting. From now on, we're going to work wet on dry. The paper will remain dry, and it's going to be easier to have control. I'm switching to my Silver Brush Black Velvet paintbrush. I like it because it has a very sharp tip and it really helps with detail. I'm going to paint the trunks and branches first. Remember, we have a base for the foliage, so we'll worry about the details later for that part. I'm using my brown shade now. I'm starting with the bottom of the trees on the edges of my sheet, and I press harder as I start with my brush to create a wider line there, and as I go up the tree and towards the middle of the sheet, I release pressure on the brush and end the trunk with the tip of the brush. This way the trunk becomes thinner and thinner. For the branches, I suggest to keep them as thin as possible, or at least most of them. If you paint thick branches everywhere, the painting may look heavier and too dark. So as I see it, drawing a lot of branches is fine and will even make this look more realistic, but most of the branches should remain thin. I'm using the tip of my brush to achieve that, and I don't press too hard. Notice how the trunks and branches alike are not straight lines, and they're different lengths. The branches may even look like they're a little bit messy, and that's completely fine. This is the kind of detail that will make your painting look more realistic. I fade the top of some branches and the top of the trunks with a clean and damp brush, because imagine that the farther those trees get from us, the least details are visible. So towards the bottom, things will be darker and more defined, and towards the top of the trees in the middle of the page, things will be lighter and less defined. Also, the sun is shining up there, and that shows thanks to all the white spaces we left in the base we painted. There are some trunks also that you can paint lighter than the others. Those are the ones that will be farther away, behind the main trunks. By adding more or less water to your brown shade, you can really make it look like they're either close or far from us. This is something I love about drawing in general, and it's the kind of effect you get by playing with contrast. And by contrast, I mean light colors, average ones, and dark ones. Now I'm switching to a bigger brush of the same kind for convenience, but whatever brush you have, as long as you can trace thin lines with, you're just fine. I wanted to try a new technique in this painting, so I decided to use a sponge to create foliage, and let me tell you, it's a fast way to get it done, so if you get a chance to try, it's fun, go for it. I put some paint, light green first, on my sponge. An important tip is to not soak the sponge with too much water. Just add a little bit of water to the concentrated mix you get out of the bottle. If the sponge gets too soaked up in water, it will lose the texture we want from it. It's the whole point of using this technique, so make sure and try dabbing that sponge on a separate piece of paper to see if it gives you texture. Like I said, I started with my lighter green and I'm progressing towards darker colors. I'm overlapping all those greens. The nice thing about this wet on dry technique with a sponge is that it dries quickly, so I'm able to move on to the darker tone fairly quickly without things bleeding into each other like crazy. Try using your sponge with different angles to not end up with some repetitive shape your sponge has. Like mine, for instance, is a rectangle shape, and if I wasn't switching angles, I would get rectangles and square edges showing in places that wouldn't be very nice. With all my greens, you can see I'm getting a nice contrast here, but I'm not satisfied with the trees. They're not dark enough, so I'm going to darken some of them to make them pop more. I also add a few branches towards the top. Do whatever feels right on your version. Add where you feel something is missing. Towards the top, remember to keep things really light, but you still need a variety of colors though, so make sure there's contrast there. And I'm keeping one of the most important steps for last, and this is what is going to make your painting shine, glow, whatever you want to call it, and in the process it will look more realistic. I'm talking about the white highlights on the trunks mainly because they're so dark. You can use a white gel pen, a white colored or pastel pencil. I prefer gouache most of the times, it's really up to you. Notice I'm making a highlight with my gouache on the same side of the tree trunks. I'm adding some gouache mixed with a little bit of water on the trunk, and then I fade the edge of what I added with a clean and damp brush so it can look more natural, so there's no harsh line there. I'm also adding a few white streaks here and there to make it look like there are tiny thin base branches up there. I like to do this as it adds a lot of light to the painting. I hope you enjoyed this painting. Tell me in the comments if you did, leave me a like or share this video on social media, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more tutorials like this one. Thanks for watching and see you next time.